Smile at the camera. Hold. So Project Origin categorizes our coffee based on the cup score. We have a few different categories. There's Black Label, which is 83 to 85 points on a cupping sheet. There's Green Label, which is 86 to 89 points. There's the Gold Label, which is 90 points and above. Then separate to that, we have our Supernatural range and our CM Selections range. How do we determine the cupping score when we cup a coffee? We use a cupping score sheet that we've adapted from the COE score sheet. Based on what Project Origin looks for, where we're typically prioritizing the cup profile over, say, green grading or those quality measurements, we find that COE allows us to reward a coffee better for certain things. So for example, on the SEA score sheet, you reward sweetness as a yes or no question. On the COE score sheet, you reward it based on a scale. So not all coffee is just sweet. Some coffee can be sweet, some coffee can be incredibly sweet, and they shouldn't, in our opinion, score the same for sweetness. The same is true for clarity. So if there's a coffee that's clean, of course, it should be scored as a clean cup. But if there's a coffee that's pristine and delicate and refined, in our opinion, it should be scored higher for clarity. And the COE model allows us to do that. So we adapted our score sheet from the COE cupping score sheet. Do we use SEA standards for green bean assessment? Yes, we do. You can just edit that, right? What are Project Origin's quality control processes? We follow the SEA guidelines, which means we take measurements for moisture, water activity, density, and we do a green grading assessment to assess major and minor defects as per the SEA standards. The other protocols that we put in place though are that when we're cupping something to buy, we are assessing, as we mentioned before, the cup profile, the purpose, the price, the relationship that we already have with the producer or the exporter. That would be at the point of making the buying decision. Once we import a coffee and we receive it into our warehouse, we would run those same QC protocols again on the arrival sample to ensure the coffee hasn't changed from what we originally approved to what arrived to us. So can you see publicly how Project Origin does its QC measurements and protocols? Yes, you can. On our website, on the quality page, you can follow the information there to see all of our QC processes and how we assess coffees for quality. The link will be in the description. Is our definition of quality the same as everyone else's definition of quality? And if not, how does Project Origin define quality? Such an open-ended question. I think our definition of quality is going to be subjective. It's going to be what makes sense to Project Origin as a company, and that may match some people's definitions and it might not match other people's definitions. So what is quality to Project Origin? Like I mentioned in terms of our buying processes before, we're looking for a bunch of things. The first thing is a cup profile. Ultimately, coffee is something that people drink. So we're looking to share flavor. We're looking to share expressions of cup and terroir and place. Then we're looking at the purpose for that coffee, the price, the relationship with the producer. So quality to us might be different to quality to other people, but that's how we search and decide what is quality coffee. Things that match high cup profiles, good cup scores, they have a good purpose, a reasonable price, and we have a good relationship with that producer. Cool. So if specialty coffee is 80 points and above, why does Project Origin only deal with coffee that's 83 points and above? So why don't we buy coffee that's lower than 83 points? Given our chase for cup profile and unique flavors in the cup, distinct flavors in the cup, we find that they're more often present in coffees that are 83 points and above. It's easier to find distinct qualities, things like red apple, stone fruit, in an 83, 84, 85 point coffee, than it might be to find those qualities in an 82 or 81 or 80 point coffee. Another reason that we don't usually buy coffees that are below 83 points in cup score is because of how they're often traded. So it's easier to reward a producer as their cup score goes higher into the specialty realm. So a coffee that is cupping, say, 85 points might be priced to the producer at a fixed price point. Irrelevant is the commodity market price. But as you get closer to 82, 81 and 80 points, now you're often dealing in pricing that's very closely connected to the commodity price. And for us, that's not the most sustainable way to price coffee to a producer, because it disregards the cost of production. So if we're dealing with an 84 or an 85 point coffee, the quality of that cup is usually very easy to pay a good value that would be well and truly above the cost of production, where for an 81 or 82 point coffee, that's a bit harder to do. For that reason, we focus really hard on our black label range, the 83 to 85 point, and trying to get really great profiles coming out of those cup scores. If we value the relationship with producers so much, why bother with cup scores? The relationship with the producer is Project Origin's connection to the producer and the coffee. A cup score is often our easiest connection to a roaster. So it's the other end of the supply chain, I guess. Most roasters and the specialty coffee industry in general would understand cupping scores. So for us, it's a very easy way for us to communicate how did we rate this coffee as far as all specialty coffees go, using cupping score sheets and cupping scores. So we don't feel like it makes sense to leave out cup scores as part of our measurement of the quality of a coffee. For some producers, they don't cup their coffee. They don't know how to cup, they don't understand the cupping protocols. That's not their way of judging what they've produced. You know, they judge the crop, the harvest, how they've processed, how they've dried. For other producers, they do know how to cup. They're very concentrating on cupping and understanding the end result as well. And depending on the kind of producer we're dealing with, we may actually communicate in cup score to the producers too. In some cases, the cup score does determine the price or a premium that gets paid for a particular coffee if it is cupping very well.
Is it really appropriate in this industry for you to put international SCA standards aside and create your own version of what is acceptable?
Okay, why does Project Origin think it's appropriate to put aside SCA standards and put forward our own version of what's acceptable specialty coffee? Good question, tough question. So SCA standards are definitely important to the way we buy and sell coffee at Project Origin. But for us, they're one tool among many. For example, if we buy a coffee and it meets SCA criteria, then we ship it and we receive it in Australia or anywhere in the world and find that it no longer meets the SCA criteria for green grading, for example. It's kind of irrelevant whether that coffee is specialty or not anymore, because you now have a physical product in a place and you kind of need to work out what to do with it. And we have found ourselves in that position before. So as a business that buys and sells coffee, you also have to deal with instances where things don't go exactly as you planned. Where a coffee does not meet SCA criteria, or the green grading is less than specialty, or perhaps you find a major defect, which would be normally grounds to reject an entire container load of coffee. It's not very practical in Project Origin's opinion in most cases. It also is very damaging to a producer to suggest that they should be picking up coffee from Australia and shipping it all the way back to their country to sell on the local market. It's kind of damaging for everybody. So in those instances then, we're working in a commercial sense, what can we do with that product? And our approach would again be to go back to what's the cup profile, what's the cup score, what's the price, and what's the relationship like? And if the coffee still cups well, even though the SCA standards are no longer at a specialty level, in our opinion, that's still the major priority. For most roasters, they'll roast it, they'll put it through their cafes or sell it wholesale, and they'll still get a good result for their clients. So the green grading may not be the most problematic thing, but if there are larger scale defects or problems that would absolutely affect taste, you'll notice it when you cup them. And then if we cup it and it's no longer hitting the cup profile or cup score it was intended for, then we need to work out how serious is that damage. If we bought a coffee at 84 points, for example, and it arrives to us at 81 points, now we would have to consider a discount for whoever we'd sell that coffee to, because it's not hitting the same quality mark. So we'd work out what kind of client would still be happy to use a coffee like that, and what price would they be willing to pay for it. And in that way, we don't need to go to our producer or exporter and reject an entire cargo and ask them to, take it back. When you've literally milled it, bagged it, put it into a container, put it on a boat, sent it across the ocean, received it, unpacked it, and now decided you're not happy with it. So it's, in our opinion, a better way to deal with the problem. And then the following year, we might, again with that producer, go, look, we had this issue last year, can you potentially discount what we buy from you next year? to compensate for the issues that we've had. And in that way, we have a longer term solution to a problem rather than just assessing a coffee purely on its green grading merit when it arrived to you. That's more the project origin style of assessing coffee, dealing with quality and dealing with issues. So in instances where we have a quality issue like that, we would work with our roasting partners. We'd let them know what problem has come up and how we now cup that coffee, what the score is, what the profile is, what the defects are. But then they get to be part of the solution now, and we can potentially spread the risk and the problem all the way along the supply chain. Instead of rejecting a coffee and telling the producer to come and pick it up, we work with a roaster that may still be able to use that coffee for a certain purpose at a discounted price perhaps, or something like that. And then they get to be part of the solution. They get potentially a cheaper coffee. They still get to use the coffee. Project Origin gets to work it from the producer's point of view to the roaster's point of view. And we still get to maintain our relationship with the producer. So everybody in that scenario now benefits instead of just blocking a product for a problem and sending it back to the producer so it becomes just their problem. And that's what direct trade's all about. So why do we measure things like water activity, moisture, density, and what happens if a coffee doesn't sit in the acceptable range for those measurements? We use those as a guide, as a tool, a little like the other SCA guidelines. They give us indication as to a coffee's journey and where it is at the moment. It tells us things about the coffee's potential shelf life and any changes that may have happened from when we originally had an offer sample that we accepted to when it's arrived to us in the country. If those measurements no longer match what they were before, or they sit outside of what should be an acceptable range, it would depend on what the problem was. As an example, if we receive a coffee that it has a really low moisture content or a high moisture content, that would suggest to us that shelf life might be a problem for that product. So in that case, we might want to fast track that coffee being sold and used through the roaster. Again, we can communicate the QC results to the roaster so they're aware of it, and we would say something like, this coffee still cups well, it still sits in the right score and profile, we're happy with how it tastes. However, these measurements indicate that it might age faster than you expect, so try and use it earlier or reconsider how much of it you wanted to buy. So how do we assess CM Selections coffees in green grading and in cupping? Our priority with the CM Selections range from the very beginning was about creating expressive cup profiles. So again, very much focused on cupping profiles and flavor expression of coffee. So that is still our focus. We still cup it on our usual score sheets, and we do score those coffees. However, when we sell them, we don't sell them with a cup score. Our intention again is to guide our roasting partners with what that coffee is going to taste like, so they can sort of curate their experience or buy coffees that suit the kinds of things they're looking for. Are they looking for red fruits? Are they looking for florals and you know, clean cups? On a green grading level with CM coffees, there isn't really a system that allows us to measure them well. And so that's something that we're working on at Project Origin, to develop a way that we can better assess the green grading and the visual assessments of coffees that have undergone, you know, fermentation processes that aren't your traditional methods, washed honey and natural. So at the moment, we do that case by case, but we are still very much looking for coffee that has good hand sorting, doesn't have major defects in it, and still meets a reasonable criteria for what the green coffee should look like. I use the words green coffee a little loosely though, because often coffees that have been heavily processed look more yellow or orange, and that's actually part of the problem. So sometimes you might see a yellow bean and assume it's sour, when it's actually not. It's just undergone maybe a heavier fermentation. So it looks more yellow and still tastes exceptional, but it challenges the traditional methods of green grading and green assessment. So we're working on methods to improve how we communicate that and how we assess that as well with our roasting partners and with our producers at Origin. What happens if a coffee tastes really good but looks really bad? We have dealt with coffees like this before. Literally looking at the beans and going, this is going to be terrible. And some of those coffees we've cupped as high as 90 points. You might find hard to believe. based on the fact that a coffee that might look really bad, but can still taste really good, and given that for many roasters, and as a green company, Project Origin is chasing great flavors, we still think that coffee has value. And you might have instances where to the producer or the exporter, because of how it looked, they might have had to sell it at very low value. And if you consider commodity pricing, for example, that might be less than $1 per pound. But if something's cupping 88 or 89 points, potentially it has value at least as good as good looking in terms of green quality, 83, 84, 85 point coffee. And so that would be almost double, if not triple, the value that they would have got if they sold that same coffee locally and chose never to offer it to us. However, when dealing with coffees like that, of course it's important that we share with our roasting partners that they need to be prepared for how the coffee looks. And some are more than happy to just judge a coffee based on how it tastes and potentially still get very good value out of it. So that's normally how we would play with those coffees. It's not the most common thing that we do, but we've definitely experienced coffees that look odd or bad and still taste really good. What do we do if a coffee is full of defects? It depends on the kind of defect, to be very honest. If the defect is directly going to cause an issue with cup profile, so you're going to cup it and it's going to taste phenolic, moldy, flat, nutty, peanutty, over fermented, any of those very obvious flavor taints, then absolutely for us you can't sell that product, or at least you can't sell it for its initial purpose. In those instances, we would be looking for any roaster that's happy to use a product that is now kind of at a commodity level or a defective level. You'd be selling it at, super cheap price, basically just to move it because you've got a physical product in your warehouse that you need to find a home for. That's what we would do with those kinds of coffees. Where something has higher defects, but they do not affect the flavor of the cup, now it's a matter of explaining to a roaster, look, the defect count's a little bit high, but the cup profile is still exactly as it should be. So is this still useful to you? And if the answer is yes, then you would probably discount that product. Or if they wanted to no longer buy it, you would allow them to not buy it because it doesn't match the green grading defect criteria. But otherwise, we would still offer that coffee for sale because the cup profile is still good. It still has a purpose. You would, again, just sell it at a lower price. So do we always follow our QC protocols, or are there exceptions? Yes, we always follow our QC protocols. The only exceptions we might allow are for specific types of coffees, or particularly where they've been processed in unique ways. So your supernaturals or CMs, it's possible that some of the data you get out of the normal green grading protocols, we will still follow them. But for example, you might see a higher number of broken beans. You might see a higher number of discolored beans. And for coffees like that we know have undergone processing, that might be the reason for those kinds of minor defects, we might overlook or allow that not to cause it to fail quality control. So long as the cup profile is still on point and the cup score is still at the level it needs to be. If it's affecting quality in the profile or flavor of the cup, then that's a different thing altogether. But yeah, we still follow the QC protocols for all our coffees. Do we ever send coffee back to Origin if it fails QC? No. Okay. How much does a QC result influence our decision to buy or sell a coffee? I'm going to separate buying and selling as two different processes, and say that QC is definitely part of the process, but it's not the only part. So when we're buying a coffee, we will always cup it first. It's the first thing that we do. And if it cups well, then we would consider what's the purpose for that coffee, what's its price point, and what's our relationship to the producer. If it was to fail a quality control measurement before we've even agreed to buy it, then we would probably need to understand, is that something we can work with or not? For example, if the moisture is way too high or way too low, that's a pretty risky product to buy, because as it would ship from one part of the world to another, you might have problems with quality. So we might reject it even if it cupped well. That would be at a buying stage. If in the buying stage, maybe it had a high defect count of things like broken beans or insect damage, but it cupped really well. Well, the next step in the process, if we agreed to buy that coffee, is it's going to go through dry milling, and those kinds of defects can be removed. So we would mention that issue to the producer or the exporter, and request that they try and improve that the green quality before it's exported to us. At the selling level, which means we've already received that coffee into our warehouse, we've already bought it, it's shipped and it's here now. We do another round of quality control. We assess it again for all the usual measurements: moisture, water activity, density, green grading and cupping. And if there is an issue with the quality assessment at that point, now we need to work out how do we sell it. It's not our style to return a coffee. We don't think that's very beneficial to anybody. So then we're working out, okay, can any of our roasting partners still use it? If so, what's the quality level it's at now and what's a fair price for it? And we would let them know this was our quality assessment. It's different to what we thought it was going to be, but if you can still use it, this will be the price point for it. So the QC result is important, and it kind of depends on which stage of the process you're in as to what decision you'll make about what to do about it.